Mike Tyson, once the most feared man in the boxing ring, is now just another inmate behind the towering concrete walls of Rockwood Penitentiary, a maximum security prison where respect isn't given, it's taken. He tries to keep his head down, do his time, and move on. But in a place like this, peace is just an illusion. Inside these walls, power is the only currency, and weakness, it's a death sentence. A ruthless gang of racist inmates, led by a brutal, power-hungry leader, sees Tyson as just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. To them, he's a fallen legend. A man without his gloves, without his entourage, without his millions. Just another target in a world ruled by violence. But what they don't realize is that they've just picked a fight with the most dangerous boxer to ever walk the earth. The moment they make their move, Tyson unleashes hell. A storm of fury, precision, and raw power that will shake the prison to its very core. The cold, merciless walls of Rockwood rise like a fortress of despair, casting long shadows over the desolate landscape. This isn't just a prison, it's a tomb for the living. The moment the massive steel gates slam shut, the sound echoes through the halls like the final toll of a funeral bell. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of sweat, fear, and desperation. Every man trapped within these walls knows one simple truth: you either dominate or you're destroyed. Survival here isn't just about strength, it's about willpower, strategy, and knowing when to strike. Many have tried to fight the system, but in the end, Rockwood breaks them all. But Tyson? He's been broken before. And this time, he's not going down without a fight. In Rockwood Penitentiary, there is no law, only survival. It's a jungle where the strongest rule, where the weak are prey, and where mercy is nothing but a distant memory. Mike Tyson, once the undisputed king of the ring, now shuffles through the dimly lit corridors of this cold, merciless prison. The bright orange jumpsuit hangs on his broad frame like a brand of disgrace, a stark contrast to the championship belts he once wore. The metallic clink of his handcuffs echoes in the silence, a brutal reminder that here he is no longer Iron Mike. But Tyson has seen this world before. He's felt the weight of chains, the cold steel of a prison bed, the suffocating air of a cell too small for a man like him. He's fought demons both in and out of the ring, and now he finds himself thrown back into the belly of the beast. Here there is no crowd to cheer his name, no referees to stop the fight, only predators and prey. Within Rockwood's razor-wire fences, fame is worthless, a flimsy shield that can't stop a shank in the dark or an ambush in the yard. The only thing that matters here is power. Inmates would kill for an extra scrap of meat, fight for the privilege of sleeping near a window, betray a friend just to move up in the food chain. It's a never-ending battle, a war of dominance, shifting alliances, and unspoken rules. And the moment word spreads that Tyson has arrived, the entire prison erupts into a feeding frenzy. Like a spark in a dry forest, news of Tyson's arrival spreads like wildfire. The moment his name is whispered, the prison awakens. "Yo, that's Tyson," one inmate mutters, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah, man, the champ himself," another replies, his expression a mix of awe and unease. Across the cell block, a ripple of murmurs turns into a low hum of excitement. Some prisoners remember his legendary fights, his devastating knockouts. Others, seeing only the jumpsuit and the shackles, see something else, a man stripped of power, a fallen warrior now trapped like the rest of them. Then, from the shadows, a laugh cuts through the noise. Mocking, challenging. "Ain't no ring here, champ," a voice sneers, dripping with contempt. The taunt bounces off the concrete walls, sharp as a blade. Another voice joins in, louder this time. "Let's see how tough he is in the real world." The laughter that follows is cruel, deliberate, a public challenge, an open invitation to break the former king. Tyson doesn't flinch. His entire life has been a battlefield. But this is just another fight. He's heard the taunts before, felt the weight of doubters pressing down on him, but he doesn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. His gaze remains locked straight ahead, his face a stone mask of indifference. The voices swirl around him, jeers, insults, challenges, but he lets them wash over him like waves against a mountain. They think he's weak. They think he's broken. But what they don't realize is that Tyson is just waiting. Tyson moves through the prison, his steps slow and deliberate, not out of fear, but out of calculation. This place isn't just a prison. It's a battlefield, an endless loop of survival where every interaction is a potential war. Every stare, every movement, every silence carries weight. To Tyson, Rockwood is purgatory, a place where time doesn't move forward. It just loops endlessly between monotony and violence. There are no dreams here, no comebacks, just one day bleeding into the next, the only certainty being that someone is always watching, always waiting. And right now, in the prison yard, a group of men have their eyes locked on him. Near the weightlifting area, a group of men sit together. Massive, hardened, bodies chiseled from years of brutality and prison workouts. Their muscles aren't for show. They're weapons sculpted by time, rage, and necessity. They are the Iron Fangs, a gang of ruthless white supremacists who rule the yard with an iron grip. Their code is simple: white power. Dominate or be dominated. Mercy is weakness. And now, their predatory eyes shift in unison, locking onto one man, Mike Tyson. A new challenge, a new target. At the center of the gang sits Travis "Bull" Carter. He's a towering slab of muscle, his skin a roadmap of hate, covered in gang symbols and inked threats. His gaze sweeps over the yard, cold and calculating, until it lands on Tyson. A cruel smirk tugs at the corner of his lips. He doesn't see a legend. He doesn't see a warrior. He sees an opportunity. From across the yard, Bull Carter's voice erupts like a thunderclap, cutting through the air with the authority of a man who believes he owns this place. "Look at that," he sneers, his words drenched in mockery and venom. Big bad Tyson, walking around like he still matters. His voice carries, reaching every corner of the yard. It's not just a taunt, it's a public spectacle, an open challenge. Beside him, Lenny Razor Pierce, a wiry, scar-faced enforcer with a permanent scowl and a thirst for violence, scoffs in disgust. His eyes, sharp and predatory, glint with malice. "Think he's tough?" Lenny spits, his lips curling in a sneer. "Ain't got his fancy gloves here. Ain't no ring, no ref, just another punk now." The gang chuckles, their laughter a cruel, biting sound that spreads like a vulture's call over fresh carrion. This isn't about Tyson's past. This is about now. And in Rockwood, the past means nothing. Bull's expression darkens, his cold blue eyes narrowing, locking onto Tyson's retreating figure like a predator sizing up its prey. His voice drops into a low, menacing growl, carrying the weight of a decision already made. "Maybe we should remind him who really runs this place," he mutters, his words laced with cruel amusement. The gang stirs, the hunger in their eyes unmistakable. Lenny grins, cracking his knuckles. A little humiliation never hurt anyone, right? The men around them murmur in savage agreement, their bodies shifting, their postures changing. They aren't just talking anymore. They're preparing for the hunt. And Mike Tyson? They have no idea what kind of beast they're about to provoke. The Iron Fangs weren't just a gang. They were predators. And right now, their sights were locked onto one man. A low, sinister chuckle rippled through their ranks, a chorus of bloodlust and anticipation. Their expressions? Cruel. Hungry. The way they watched Tyson was the way a pack of wolves watches a wounded stag, with a single-minded focus, already tasting the kill. But Tyson? He wasn't even looking at them. He sat alone in the prison cafeteria, a dull, lifeless place, a pale imitation of the real world where even food tasted like punishment. The tray before him held the only thing he could control in this place: his silence, his routine, his focus. But Rockwood doesn't allow peace. Without warning, smash! A heavy tray slammed into his table, sending his food flying, splattering across the floor in a messy explosion of gristle and mush. Tyson looked up, slowly. And there they were. The iron fangs stood around him, their faces twisted into masks of malicious glee. Bull Carter loomed over him, his sadistic smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. Bull tilted his head, feigning innocence, his voice dripping with mockery. "Oops," he drawled, that arrogant grin widening. "Looks like I ruined your dinner, champ." The gang laughed, their jeers bouncing off the cafeteria walls. To them, this was entertainment. A game. A way to remind everyone, even a legend like Tyson, that in Rockwood they made the rules. But what they didn't realize? They had just made the worst mistake of their lives. The cafeteria fell into a thick, charged silence, the kind that feels like the air before a thunderclap. The Iron Fangs expected fury. They wanted an explosion. They wanted Tyson to snap, to lash out, to give them an excuse to turn this into a spectacle of humiliation. But instead, Tyson sighed. Not in anger, not in defiance, but in something far worse for them: disinterest. His broad shoulders slumped, his breath slow and controlled. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, almost mournful. "That was my food, man." That's all he said. No rage, no threats, just those 5 simple words, spoken like a man too tired to fight battles that don't matter. And that made them furious. Lenny leaned in, his face twisted into a sneer. He smelled blood. His voice, sharp and taunting, slithered through the air. "So," he hissed, his words dripping with mockery and venom. "What you gonna do about it? Throw a tantrum like a little baby? Cry to your daddy, maybe?" The gang erupted into laughter, their voices ringing through the cafeteria like a cruel symphony of mockery. They were testing him, pushing him. But Tyson, he didn't flinch. His face remained a stone mask, unbothered, unshaken. He simply exhaled, his voice a deep, measured rumble. "I ain't here for trouble." No emotion, no reaction. Just the cold, unshakable truth. But the thing about trouble? It doesn't care if you're looking for it. Tyson's voice was calm, steady, a low rumble of restrained power. "I just want to do my time." But Bull Carter wasn't interested in peace. He wanted a show. He wanted to break the former champ. His eyes narrowed, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a snarl. He leaned in close, his hot, sour breath filling the space between them. "Yeah!" he spat, his voice laced with pure venom. "Well, your time just got a whole lot harder." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine, the weight of it pressing down on the room. Then, a blur of movement. Bull's hand lashed out, his fingers closing around Tyson's cup of water with predatory swiftness. Splash! The water cascaded down Tyson's face, dripping from his chin like a baptism of humiliation. The rest spilled onto the table, dribbling over the edges, pooling at his feet. The cafeteria fell deathly silent. No more clattering trays, no more loud conversations. Just dozens of eyes locked onto one moment. Everyone knew what had just happened. The unspoken laws of prison politics had been shattered. This wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge. Tyson sat completely still. His jaw tightened, just a fraction. His fists, resting on the table, remained steady. But inside, a storm was brewing. The former king of the ring wasn't just disrespected, he was targeted. And in this place, a man like Mike Tyson only stays quiet for so long. This wasn't just a brawl waiting to happen. It was war. A challenge to the prison's hierarchy. A message to every inmate watching. If Tyson fought back, he'd be making a statement. One that would ignite a firestorm of bloodshed, retaliation, and lockdowns. And despite his name, his legacy, his reputation, Tyson wasn't eager to walk that path. So he sat, silent, seething. A caged tiger, surrounded by jackals. Bull Carter leaned in, his grin sharp as a knife, his eyes filled with sadistic glee. He was savoring the moment, reveling in the fact that he had chipped away at the aura of a legend. "That's what I thought," Bull sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You ain't no champ here. You're just another inmate, a nobody, a target." The gang laughed, their voices like gunfire in the silence. Bull took one last look at Tyson, his arrogance swelling, before turning away. The gang followed, their swagger dripping with the confidence of men who believed they had just humiliated a king. Tyson didn't move. He just stared at the table, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. The silence pressed down like a crushing weight, the air thick with unspoken tension. The distant clang of metal doors closing, the faint voices of guards making their rounds. But in Tyson's world, all of it faded. Because something inside him had just snapped. The distant clang of metal doors, the muffled voices of guards making their rounds. But Tyson wasn't listening. For the once invincible heavyweight champion, the taste of defeat, of humiliation, was bitter. Not because he had lost a fight, but because he had been forced to swallow his pride, to sit there and let the jackals think they had won. But now, he was back where he felt most alive. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a stark, sterile glow over the prison gym. And in the middle of the empty room, thud, thud, thud. The sound of leather on leather echoed in the silence, a staccato beat of violent poetry. Tyson, his shirtless torso glistening with sweat, his muscles coiled with raw power, pounded the punching bag with a focused fury that went beyond anger. This wasn't rage. This was discipline. Precision. The razor-sharp edge of a man who had spent his entire life turning destruction into an art form. Every punch landed with the force of a wrecking ball. Every strike sent shockwaves through the bag, his fists moving with the fluidity of a predator honed for the kill. But even here, even in this moment of raw focus, the echoes of what had happened in the cafeteria still haunted him. The laughter, the insults, the water running down his face. The world may have forgotten who he was, but they were about to remember. Tyson's breathing was steady, controlled, the rhythmic rise and fall of a man lost in his own world. So lost that he almost didn't register the danger creeping up behind him. The shadows stretched long across the gym floor, crawling toward him like the hands of something sinister. Then, a shift in the air, a presence. And suddenly, Tyson knew. He wasn't alone. As he turned, the reality of the situation crashed into him like a freight train. Bull Carter stood at the front of the pack, his eyes gleaming with malice, his lips curling into a predator's grin. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, menacing growl. "We ain't done, champ." Bull spat the word like poison. "We ain't done, champ." That last word, champ, dripped with sarcasm, turning what was once a title of honor into nothing more than a taunt. He stepped forward, towering over Tyson, his presence radiating dominance. "You want to be left alone?" he sneered. "Then you gotta pay your dues." Beside him, Lenny Razor Pierce moved in closer, his voice slithering into the space between them like a blade pressed to flesh. "That means giving us everything you got," he growled, his tone a quiet hurricane of threat and intimidation. "Your commissary, your shoes, your respect, everything." His dead-eyed stare locked onto Tyson's. "It's that, or you keep getting your ass kicked every time you step out of your cell." Behind them, the rest of the gang stood motionless, their silence more menacing than any shouted threat. No one needed to say a word. The message was clear. Tyson was either going to kneel, or he was going to bleed. Tyson's jaw tightened. His hands, relaxed at his sides, stayed still. But his eyes? They were like granite, cold, unyielding. Then, in a voice as solid as stone, he answered, "Ain't happening." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Bull's expression darkened, his eyes flaring with rage. The last vestiges of civility, whatever thin mask of control he had been holding onto, shattered like glass. "Then we do it the hard way," he snarled. And just like that, he snapped. Bull's fist shot out, a blur of raw power, slicing through the air like a scythe meant to take Tyson's head off. But Bull had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. Bull swung with everything he had, a punch fueled by rage, bloodlust, and the arrogant belief that he was untouchable. But in his blind fury, he made the worst mistake a man can make against Mike Tyson. He missed. Tyson's instincts, honed by years of combat, took over. A subtle shift, a quick bob. His head moved just inches, slipping out of range with the effortless grace of a predator avoiding a snare. Bull's fist cut through empty air, his momentum carrying him forward, his body overextended and wide open. And in that split second, Tyson struck. Boom! A left hook to the ribs, delivered with surgical precision and bone-crushing power. The impact was like the crack of thunder, a sound that reverberated through the gym like the first tremors of an earthquake. Bull, the so-called king of Rockwood, staggered backward, his mouth gaping open in shock. A grunt, half-grown, half-strangled yelp escaped his lips as the pain rippled through his body like a shockwave. His legs buckled, his breath hitched, and then he dropped to one knee. For the first time, Bull Carter looked vulnerable, beatable, human. Lenny froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. Bull, their leader, the man who ran the yard, was on his knees at Tyson's feet. For a second, a flicker of fear danced behind Lenny's eyes. Then it was gone, swallowed by rage. "Get him!" His voice exploded like a gunshot, a savage war cry that galvanized the gang into action. Like a pack of rabid wolves, the Iron Fangs rushed forward, their thirst for revenge eclipsing any sense of reason or fairness. A blur of fists and feet, a wave of hatred and violence crashing toward one man. But Mike Tyson? He was ready. The Iron Fangs came like a tidal wave of fists and fury, a pack of animals driven by rage, thirsting for revenge. But Mike Tyson? He didn't retreat. He didn't hesitate. He didn't fear them. He met their onslaught head-on. His body, thrumming with adrenaline, moved with a deadly rhythm, every strike precise, every blow calculated for maximum devastation. A flurry of jabs, lightning fast, brutal, surgical. An uppercut, thrown with the kind of force that had once sent giants crashing to the mat. A hook, pure destruction wrapped in muscle and fury. Bam! A thunderous right hook exploded against Lenny's jaw, the impact snapping his head back. His body whipped sideways, crashing into the cold steel of the weight racks with a bone-rattling thud. Thud! Another gang member lunged, arms outstretched in a desperate attempt to tackle Tyson. But he never made it. Tyson's fist met his ribs first, folding him like a house of cards. His body hit the ground hard, a limp mass of pain, like a prisoner finally breaking free of his chains, only to collapse under the weight of his own failure. Another enemy rushed in from behind. Tyson felt him before he saw him. He moved instinctively, his body twisting like a coiled spring. Whoosh! Crack! A devastating backward elbow strike slammed into the attacker's face. A sickening crunch filled the air. Blood sprayed. The man stumbled back, his hands covering his shattered nose, his muffled screams lost in the chaos as he fought to contain the crimson tide pouring down his face. Through the chaos, Bull Carter staggered to his feet, his face contorted with pure hatred, humiliated, beaten, and blinded by a rage that drowned out every ounce of logic. With a roar, he grabbed a weightlifting bar, his massive hands wrapping around the cold metal like it was a weapon of war. His muscles flexed. His breath came in ragged gasps. He lifted the bar high and charged. Bull lunged, his arms swinging wildly, the steel bar slicing through the air like a scythe meant to reap Tyson's head from his shoulders. The sheer force behind the swing could have shattered bone, caved in a skull. But Tyson was gone before it ever got close. His reflexes, razor sharp, instinctual, lethal, took over. He weaved. He slipped. He moved like liquid, twisting and contorting with a grace that defied his size. A predator evading a blind, reckless hunter. Bull's momentum carried him too far forward, leaving him wide open, vulnerable. And Tyson struck. Boom! A fist, coiled like a wrecking ball, exploded into Bull's kidney with surgical precision and unforgiving force. The sound, a deep, sickening thud, made even the hardened convicts watching flinch. Bull's face twisted in agony. His grip loosened. His knees buckled. Clang! The weightlifting bar crashed to the ground, the sound ringing through the gym like a funeral bell. Tyson stood over him, breathing hard but calm, his body drenched in sweat, but his presence unwavering. There was no arrogance in his stance, only certainty. His dark, piercing stare locked onto Bull, pinning him in place. And then, in a voice low, measured, deadly, Tyson sealed his fate. "You done?" Not a yell. Not a threat. Just a simple, sinister whisper, one that carried more weight than 1,000 shouted warnings. Bull trembled, his body racked with pain, his pride shattered. He knew. He was beaten. But some men don't know when to stay down. Bull roared, his body screaming in pain, but his pride refusing to die. With one last burst of rage, he launched himself at Tyson, his fist cocked back, a final, desperate act of defiance. But Tyson was faster, smarter, deadlier. Like a shadow slipping through darkness, he ducked, fluid, effortless, lethal. His hands lashed out, snaking around Bull's collar with the precision of a cobra striking its prey. Bull's breath hitched, his body locked up, his muscles, already failing him, crumpled under the weight of exhaustion and pain. He coughed, wheezed, his body now nothing more than a broken heap of defeat. Tyson crouched beside him, his face stone cold, unreadable. His voice, when he finally spoke, was as cold and unyielding as the concrete beneath them. "Ain't about being tough." His words cut deeper than any punch ever could. "Ain't about being feared." Bull's eyes flickered, his pride fighting against the truth sinking in. "It's about knowing when to stand down." Tyson's stare bore into him. "You just learned the hard way." Then, alarms. The high-pitched wail pierced the air, signaling the arrival of Rockwood's guards. The clatter of boots echoed through the gym. The harsh glare of the overhead lights intensified, casting long, brutal shadows over the aftermath of the chaos. The guards rushed in, weapons drawn, expecting a riot, a war, a bloodbath. But instead, they froze. Because what they saw defied all expectations. The Iron Fangs, the scourge of Rockwood Penitentiary, the men who ran the yard with an iron grip, were now lying in ruins, scattered, beaten, broken, and standing amidst the wreckage. Mike Tyson. The gym floor was a battlefield, and its fallen warriors lay scattered like broken pieces of a lost cause. One man, that's all it took. A single fighter, whose fists moved like lightning and struck with the precision of a sniper's bullet, had annihilated an entire gang. The guards, standing at the edge of the wreckage, took it all in. The shattered dominance of the Iron Fangs, the groaning bodies littered across the floor, the undeniable proof of what had just happened. And then, their eyes fell on Tyson. Not a single one of them moved to restrain him, because even they knew better. The next day, under the blistering sun, Tyson sat alone on a worn-out bench in the prison yard, a solitary figure among a sea of convicts. But today was different. Yesterday, mocking whispers had filled the air. Jeers, sneers, and laughter had followed his every move. Today, silence. Not fear, respect. Every inmate, from hardened lifers to fresh-faced newcomers, stole furtive glances at him. Because now, they knew. Tyson wasn't just another inmate. He was something else entirely. He had walked into the lion's den, and instead of being devoured, he became the lion. The Iron Fangs were gone. Their shadows no longer loomed over the yard. Some said Bull and his men had been dragged off to solitary confinement, their reign of terror brought to a humiliating end. Others? They whispered something darker. that maybe, just maybe, the ghosts of Tyson's fallen opponents had come back to haunt the men who had dared to challenge him. The rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that the ghosts of Tyson's fallen opponents had returned, haunting the men who had dared to challenge him. That Bull and his crew weren't just beaten. They were cursed. Others said it wasn't ghosts at all. It was just Tyson. And that was far worse. Across the yard, a figure approached, moving slow, deliberate, like a man who had seen too much, survived too long. Ray. His body was a living map of scars and ink, each tattoo a story, each line on his face a testament to a lifetime spent waging war on the streets and behind bars. He sidled up to Tyson's bench, his movements easy, but his eyes sharp. "Heard you had a rough night," Ray drawled, his voice a study in gravel and grit. Tyson didn't look up, didn't need to. He could hear the amusement in Ray's tone, the way the old-timer let the words hang in the air like smoke. "Bull and his boys, huh?" Ray chuckled, a low, rusty sound like a knife being dragged across metal. "They never learn." Tyson's mouth curled into a wry smirk, a hint of satisfaction flickering across his face. He leaned back against the bench, his posture radiating something that wasn't arrogance, but wasn't submission either. Calm defiance. "Yeah," he said, his words punctuated by a dry chuckle. "But I slept good." Ray laughed. A real laugh this time, though it quickly turned into a hacking cough, the sound of a man who had seen too much and yet still found humor in the darkest places. "I bet you did, champ." He looked at Tyson, his roomy, knowing eyes taking in the man beside him. Tyson didn't just survive Rockwood. He owned it. Ray, a man who had lived through 1,000 tales of crime and incarceration, chuckled again, a deep, knowing sound that echoed through the stillness of the yard. "They won't bother you no more." His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen the rise and fall of many before, a man who understood the unspoken laws of survival in a place like Rockwood. The others? They know now. He nodded toward the prisoners who sat, stood, and moved around the yard, casting cautious, knowing glances in Tyson's direction. "You showed 'em what you're made of." Tyson didn't need to respond. He simply stared out at the horizon, his expression unreadable, his mind already moving beyond the fight, beyond the moment. Because here, in Rockwood, nothing lasted forever, not even victory. Survival wasn't about winning once, it was about staying undefeated, and he knew. The next test was always waiting. Ray let out a slow breath, the kind that carried years of hard-earned wisdom. "You gotta remind 'em," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Respect in here? It's worth more than gold." His gaze locked onto Tyson, his words carrying the weight of experience, of countless battles fought in places just like this. "Sometimes trouble finds you. But you can't just sit there and take it. You gotta show 'em. Show 'em who you are. Show 'em what you're capable of." Tyson nodded once, not as a man who had just won a fight, but as a man who understood exactly what came next. The camera slowly pulls back, framing Tyson and Ray, two warriors from different generations, against the backdrop of a prison that was both brutal and strangely beautiful in its own unforgiving way. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows across the yard. Because in Rockwood, there are no true endings, only survivors. The sun dipped low, a fiery blaze of crimson and gold. Long shadows stretched across the yard, turning men into silhouettes, warriors into wraiths, predators into phantoms. In that moment, beneath the fading light, Tyson and Ray stood tall. Two men, two survivors. In a world where strength was currency and survival was as perilous as climbing a mountain of shattered glass, they had endured. The lines between men and monsters blurred inside Rockwood's walls. But Tyson, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving.